This is a somewhat niche topic, but enough people have asked about it that I decided I would do a few videos. With this being the first, I think it's important to note that there is certainly no wrong way to collect video games, be it for Neo Geo or any other system for that matter. I'll try to give some information on each topic that I cover, maybe some do's and don'ts, and of course my personal opinion on things. I don't know everything there is to know about MVS carts, and since, as I've already said, collecting is largely driven by personal preferences, you should think of this as an open discussion and share any experiences or tips that you have in the comments. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into our first topic, cart labels. Let's start with something basic here. In general, you're going to find that most Neo MVS carts have either a Japanese or an English label. There are a handful of games that then also have Korean or European variant labels. Let's take a look at some examples by introducing a fantastic website that hosts label and PC board images, mvsscans.com. And here's an easy one to start off with, Real Bout Fatal Fury Special. The Japanese label is, of course, in Japanese. The Korean label has a tall English font, and then the USA label looks pretty standard with the game title and serial number. So why does that matter? Well, if you're collecting carts and want to ensure that you have an original label, you can start by comparing pics of what you're buying to labels that are hosted here on MVS Scans. For me personally, I only collect English labeled carts, unless the game was only released in Japan, of course. I want to ensure that what I'm buying, especially given the price of Neo carts, is 100% genuine. Here's a quick example. This is an Aero Fighters 2 cart for sale on eBay. I can tell by looking at it that the font is off on the title and that the MVS and Neo Geo names on the left don't look correct either. A quick peek at MVS Scans reveals that this is indeed a non-factory label. Further, the description of the listing says tested and working, and this always makes me a little cautious as well, as the seller isn't necessarily telling you it's a fake or reproduction, they're just acknowledging that it works. There were no PCB board pics for this listing either, which is a topic for another day, but seeing a fake label always makes me a little worried that the game inside may also be a bootleg. And here's a good time to pause and circle back to our main topic of collecting. In all reality, you may not care that the labels are or are not real so long as the PCBs are original. In other words, you're taking the "it's what's inside that counts" approach. Again, there's no wrong way to collect, it's all personal preference. I'd even argue that you should be able to save a little bit of money by buying a genuine game that then has a fake or reproduction label, so it's certainly a valid strategy to take if you decide you're okay with it. And speaking of reproduction labels, let's venture down that path. This can be a little trickier since the labels can sometimes look like originals. Hopefully the seller is nice enough to disclose that the label is a reproduction, but if they aren't, there are a few things you can try and look at. First and foremost, many reproduction labels often have the game's NGH number printed on them. This is a nice distinction that allows repros to be easily distinguished from originals. It gives people a way to make their carts look great without passing them off as originals. It's also important to note that the NGH number is different than a game's serial number. NGH numbers are a unique identifier used by Neo games for high scores and saves, and were not printed on any labels by a factory. This number will always be the same. For instance, Baseball Stars 2 will always be 041. In contrast, the serial numbers of games are sometimes printed on labels, and no two should be alike. Secondly, some repro labels will have square cut corners. Here's a really high quality Fatal Fury 3 repro that I have. If we pretended for a moment that the NGH number wasn't on the front, we could still corner spot and see that the label is octagonal and not ovular. Sometimes people will use nail clippers to trim these. Granted, this is tough to see in pics unless you ask your seller, but it's another strategy you might be able to use as a quick check. And finally, there is just the flat out poorly printed reproduction label that looks bad. These are usually just done on an inkjet printer with poor quality paper. Once you've looked at a few genuine labels, you'll get an idea as to what the paper quality should be like, and you'll know by cheap feel and bleeding inks, what you are looking at is a haphazard DIY. If you're interested in labels for some banged up carts or for games that are just flat out missing labels, JAMMA Nation hosts a nice collection of reproduction labels that are available for printing. Each of these are modeled after the style the original was made in, and of course includes the NGH number we previously discussed. In the spirit of preservation, I'd argue that you should try and keep an original label if at all possible, and know that if you do plan on selling your games, you should be honest with your fellow Neo fans and be clear that the label is a repro. Something you won't typically see reproduced though, at least currently, are the holographic labels that are used on quite a few Neo Geo carts. The holographic labels began appearing in mid-96 as best anyone can tell, and they have a helix pattern when shown under light. If you see something that isn't in that helix pattern, then you are most likely dealing with a fake. The only exception to that rule that I'm aware of is Nightmare in the Dark, where the holographic label has more of a speckled dust pattern to it with complementing vertical lines. This seems to be fairly common with this game, and the PCB boards inside the carts check out as authentic in each reported case that I've seen. I can't say why this is an outlier, but it does seem to be the way that the game was shipped. There are also a few games which shipped with both standard and holographic labels. My Metal Slug cart, for instance, has a holographic label, whereas more commonly you'd find this game with a standard print label. Conversely then, Blazing Star seems to have been more commonly produced with a holo label, with only a few instances of standard labels popping up from time to time. On a final note, I don't believe there are any Japanese labeled games that are holographic. I've never seen one in person, listed for sale, or discussed in any forums. If you have, definitely mention which game in the comments below. An interesting one-off that I felt we needed to discuss is the game Bang Bead. There is a very common and prevalent fake label with this game. The name of the game, as we already said, is Bang Bead, but the fake label rebadges the game as Bang Progress. You'll also notice that the serial number for this will always be the same, 578, which is obviously because one of these was made and then copied for however many carts this distributor slapped their fake label onto. The story I've heard is that this was done to try and offload Bang Bead as a new game. I don't know if that is true or not, but it is very apparent that numerous copies of this exist out in the wild. I'd even venture to say that more recently I've seen the rebadged carts more than I have seen copies with the real labels. Sticking with the points we've talked about, some eagle-eyed collectors will note that the Neo Geo printed on the left of this label has a different font than what is commonly found on official issues. The paper quality of this label is also slightly thinner than that of an original Neo Geo label. And just to be clear, Bang Bead is an official game. In most cases, the boards inside this relabeled game are 100% authentic. A large batch just seems to have had their labels replaced and shipped out. I just wanted to call that out because we do have some commonly produced fan-made conversion games like Cross Swords 2, Ironclad, Diggerman, and Ghostlop, all of which never saw actual MVS releases and are thus unofficial. Because of this, obviously none of the labels found on these games are genuine either, because, well, the games themselves are handcrafted conversions. So yeah guys, labels, how exciting was that? If you take one thing away from this video though, always check to see what an authentic label looks like on MVS scans if you are at all worried about purchasing a fake or a bootleg. It's just a quick and easy check to ensure that you don't make a mistake. You can always, of course, hit up forums or Facebook groups as well. There are some really friendly people over at arcadeprojects.com and the Neo Geo for Life group on Facebook. So that's all my time for today. Don't forget that this is a rolling discussion, so by all means, please leave your thoughts, stories, and tips for collecting below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.